Now I want to say something about Beyond and Good and Evil 229, and that's about cruelty. And here, Nietzsche prefigures something about cruelty that we will see later in a genealogy. And that's the idea that we all like cruelty, right? That this is very obvious in ancient societies where people could have a great time hacking each other to death on the battlefield, or if you weren't a warrior aristocrat, you could go and watch the gladiatorial contests, or you could watch criminals being tortured to death. But Nietzsche has this further thought that people who think they're not indulging in cruelty because they don't go and watch the boxing, or they don't pull the wings off flies or anything, are still have an appetite for cruelty. They still have an appetite for cruelty. And what do they do with it? Well, if you can't vent it on other people, you turn it on yourself, right? So we are inwardly interesting and complex because we had to divide ourselves in two, so that you are both the person inflicting the cruelty and the person who's bearing the cruelty, right? Because we need to inflict cruelty, but we're not allowed to go around, lashing peasants for the sheer joy of it. What do? We invent the fine art of beating ourselves up. We think that this is all about us being moral, but, says Nietzsche, the origin of it is our need to inflict cruelty. And he carries on to say, even in research, we get to inflict bits of cruelty on ourselves. So let's suppose I've got some idea, some philosophical notion or some scientific notion that I love because it's mine. But then I find that the argument turns against it, the evidence is against it. I have to kill it. I have to murder my intellectual baby, right? I have to abandon and suppress this idea that I love because it's mine, because the arguments and the logic and the evidence is against it. So I put it to death. And in that moment, I enjoy the cruelty of destroying one of my own ideas. Cruelty not against the idea doesn't feel anything, but against myself, right? So a lot of what we're doing now, says Nietzsche, is enjoying inflicting cruelty, even if the only people we can inflict it on are ourselves, and even if the way we get to inflict it is in highly refined and obscure ways like that. And finally, I want to say something about the end of Beyond Good and Evil 260, where he talks about that gay saber. What does that mean? Well, that's gay science or gay knowledge or festive knowledge, fröhliche Wissenschaft. So merry, I guess, would be the translation. Germans wish each other a fröhliche Weihnachten, which is Merry Christmas. So it's the kind of merriment you might expect at Christmas, right? Merry knowledge in that sense. And he talks about this being something that we've learned from medieval troubadours. So there's this, I think it's a well-attested historical fact, but it doesn't really matter for us, story that if you think about early medieval life, the cultural life, because it was dominated by men whose main claim to power was hacking each other to death, you have to imagine that cultural life was kind of one long rugby club dinner. But you start to get these troubadours who are all about music and romantic stories, singing romantic songs. And they introduce ideas like courtly love, certain kind of refinement and playfulness and romanticism into European culture. Arguably, this may have come up from Spain, from the Islamic the civilization in Spain at the time. Anyway, this is what Nietzsche is nodding to when he calls his book The Gay Science. So there's an idea that we somehow need to get away from kind of gloomy Northern European knowledge and understanding, and somehow inject something of the sunshine of Provence into our philosophical work.